Now this is a lovely drive along the riverbank. Let's just follow where this person is heading to. You also gotta love those trees aligned on the right side. There's a lot of pedestrians walking here. Hold on, hey biker guy, wait. Okay. So this lady is going to a pub with a flashing unicorn. Let's hope she's the bartender or waitress. Hey guys, this is Captain Ahvious and welcome to an advanced guide to coastlines. It's finally time to work on our coastline or bank of the river, but I prefer to call it a coastline because the term bank of the river might be misinterpreted as relating to the city's finances. You know, because of the word bank. Therefore, we will call it a coastline. For everyone new here, you'll notice that we're doing some terraforming in the background without unlimited soil mod. One may wonder, why not use unlimited soil mod? You're already using unlimited ore and oil resources, and it's still a vanilla mod that came with the game. Yes, I definitely could. It would make things much easier, but I find that whenever I have unlimited soil, it becomes abusive. I find myself nearly flattening everything simply because I could. It's just toxic. Therefore, I did not activate unlimited soil. It's just going to be an extra challenge for my part. And see here, I'm already flattening this tiny hill by the highway. However, I do have plans for that area. That is where we will place the Eiffel Tower in a future episode. Try not to mind too much that we're getting soil from the other side of the tile. I am simply just trying to reduce the amount of flooding in the main part of the city. This landmass that we're expanding will become the amusement park island of the city. And due to the terraforming, the tourism commercial area is experiencing some flooding. Therefore, tip number 1, before you start on your coastline, do not build anything near the coastline. For the sake of this example, I built a tiny section so you guys will have an idea on what the design will look like. Also, try not to zone high density residential along your coastline, because if they can't survive the flood, your city will experience a death wave. The one building that makes the Disaster DLC worthwhile is the Disaster Response Unit building. Every city should have this. When a key ploppable building collapses, such as a train station, the Disaster Response Unit will send out helicopters to find survivors, and more importantly, you will be able to rebuild the collapsed building for free. And you don't have to reattach your tracks or routes. Tip number 2, plan out your bridges. Make sure that the enclosures, which is the top part of the bridge, are about the same distance from each other. Also, make sure that there is enough space between the pillars for a ferry to pass through. And last but certainly not least, and the absolute most important, make sure that the height of the bridge isn't too high or too low that the bottom of the bridge would hit the top part of the ships passing underneath. We will need to test out the height of the bridge by having a ferry pass through, hence why we created a second ferry stop. Apparently, that bridge was a bit too low that not even a road could pass underneath. See, this is why you should plan out the location of your bridges before you start to populate your coastline. It may become extremely bothersome for your sims if you had to redo your road network or move buildings if you suddenly needed to add a bridge. Uh-oh, it appears that our bridge is now too low for our ferry route. Therefore, we need to raise our bridge a little more, and I will also make this mound a little taller as well, because I plan to add in the Castle of Lord Chirpwick on top of this hill, which would match the amusement park feel. Let's power up these ferry stops and have one ferry paused under the bridge so we could properly measure the height. Tip number 3, make sure that your coastline height is balanced enough that there's no random flooding, but not too high that the passengers on the ferry piers would have to do incredible leaps just to get on and off the ferry. Tip number 4, have a ferry paused under the bridge to measure the proper height of your bridge. While making your adjustments, remember to have the pillars far enough from each other to have the enclosure, that is on top of the bridge, to be about the same distance. And of course, this would all be much easier with Move It mod, but that doesn't mean that it is impossible to do. It just takes a little more time and patience, but in the end, your effort will be worthwhile and satisfying. Now let's take a step back and check out that smooth slope from the island to the mainland. Not to mention that the height is also tall enough for a ferry to pass underneath. I need to adjust this island to make this passage a bit wider to have a ferry route and fishing routes with minimal ships colliding into each other. Let's face it, there is absolutely no way to control the timings of the ships, so expect ships to be ramming into each other, but let's make a conscious effort to reduce that from transpiring. Okay, let's take a break from the coastline and work on the inner part of the city. We will continue with our grid road layout for our high-density European zoned buildings. Then, by the avenues, we will maintain our overall theme by having walking paths and trees along the avenue. And on the next road by the avenue will be our low-density commercial buildings. Remember to never zone commercial on your avenues, but if you have to, zone moderately, but never zone high-density commercial, otherwise you will experience traffic. We will be adding a random aesthetic roundabout at this corner where we will also place in our elementary schools. I didn't realize that the roundabout was sloped, so we'll have to redo it because I plan to place an entertainment building right in the middle. Let's clean up the coastline terrain before we start adding in our fishing harbors and fish farms. When I first observed this Fisher Enclave map, what attracted me to build on it was the rivers. And my vision was to make the rivers busy with ship movement. In my point of view, the fishing industry serves two purposes. First is economy, and second, to add aesthetic movement in the water with fishing ships that would sail along with the ferries. To have an interesting looking city, try to make the city look busy and thriving by using as many and different vehicles that travel by land, air, and sea. The type of fishing that earns the most profit are tuna fishing, and it's also the largest fishing ship among all the other types of fishing. Unfortunately, this map does not have tuna in its rivers. Tuna are only available in fast-flowing rivers, while this river is calm and steady, and its best type of fishing is shellfish. And this is why we are relying on more seaweed farms to make the fishing industry more profitable. Another thing to note is the timing of when we started to add in fishing to the city. Fishing is available during the tiny town milestone, which is your first 1,000 population. Yet it is at 21,000k population of when we actually started to implement fishing. The reason being is that the lower tiered fishing types do not earn enough profit to make it worthwhile. In fact, you may experience negative weekly income if you invest in fishing instead of either a forestry or farming industry. From 0 to 21,000 population, the city has not experienced any sort of mishaps, and this is all due to proper planning. The first 5 episodes of the season was all planned toward establishing a stable economy by having the farming and or industry. Now with our current bank and weekly income, we have started to slowly invest in aesthetic unique buildings such as the Grand Mall and the Arc de Triomphe in the large roundabout. In order to afford these nice things, we need to be earning enough to make up for the upkeep costs for these buildings, so investing in industries is highly recommended. Since shell fishing does not provide the most profit, I will be using them sparingly to at least have one fishing ship going in one direction of the river. In this area, I plan to place seaweed fish farms, but we currently are not able to because this side of the tile is yet to be unlocked. I'll just make sure that what we place here for the meantime is easily replaceable. Let's not forget to add ferry piers, which are the most important part of making the river look busy and interesting. Now back to this aesthetic roundabout where we will place down a biodome that should fit nicely in the middle. We will just have to do some Jedi mind tricks with the road so that the dome can fit snugly in the middle, then we will have to reconstruct the roundabout once more. I'll just decorate the interior of the roundabout, then I will get back to you when we start our elementary school. Now on with the elementary school area, and we will kick things off with the Bouncy Castle Park. It only seems appropriate to have the Bouncy Castle near the elementary schools. You will notice me placing down multiple elementary school buildings in the same location but within the same enclosed space. So for a moment, consider that these buildings have different purposes. For instance, one building is for kindergarten, then the other building is for grades 1 to 6, and we'll consider the community schools as the recreational buildings. There is absolutely no wrong or right way to design your elementary school areas, so just have fun with it. I am also going to split up the city park to a smaller area which looks much more appropriate by creating a new park zone area and provide a new main gate. And with all the city park buildings that we've been using, this park should level up rather quickly. The walking paths and placement of trees are completely strategical because that is the slope of the terrain. We can't necessarily place buildings on slopes without the earth cracking on the sides of the buildings, therefore adding walking paths and trees is the most optimal choice. So instead of frowning on the slope, it becomes a useful part of the city. When placing down piers and harbors, cluster them together at one area. Then provide a large gap before you create a new cluster of piers and harbors. The distance between each cluster is also part of the coastline design. You may notice that in the original city design, I did not use keys or quays or however you'd want to pronounce it. This reconstruction of the same city will be a little different in its own special way, yet it will be just as magnificent. The keys help reduce the chance of random flooding, and I also like the theme of lining up the trees along the keys. You can choose to either have trees or a fence, and I choose trees. I will now let the simulation run so you guys can enjoy the decorating of the coastline. At this area, I did my best to decorate in what space was allowed, but without Prop Anarchy mod, I cannot place any objects on top of the walking path. So we'll just have to do our best with what we can with vanilla rules. By the disaster response unit, we will give them a basketball court to keep them energetic while there's no major emergency that requires their services. To encourage friendly competition, we'll also add in the Boys in Blue, which is the police helicopter depot. When it comes to saving lives and serving the public, they are on the same team, but in the basketball court, it is a completely different story. The Grand Mall is one of my favorite vanilla assets because of its interesting and unique shape. However, it looks much more inviting on its side where it shows vegetation on the upper floors. In front of your stations are the best locations to place down unique buildings and to decorate a mini park so each stop would look fascinating. Notice how we've been primarily zoning only low-density commercial along the coastline with the occasional ferry stops, fishing harbors, and farms. As much as possible, I try to avoid zoning high-density commercial altogether. They simply just invite trouble to the area, especially when you're not prepared. If you do feel the need to zone high-density commercial, make sure that it's only one block and there is a station nearby. Also along the coastline on a large flat area in front of the harbors, notice how I'm using fish markets instead of fish factories. The fish factories converts the yields to canned fish, which are goods that can be delivered to commercial areas. However, they produce 50 pollution, whereas the fish markets produces 0 pollution and just sell directly to the customers. If you start to have the not enough goods alerts from your commercial buildings, consider converting some of the fish markets to fish factories, but beware of the pollution. You cannot deny it, but the avenues look much better with the walking paths and trees aligned along the road. It's extremely tedious doing this, but the end result is worthwhile and applied throughout the entire city is just gorgeous to look at. At the avenue, we will change things up a little by adding high-density, self-sustaining buildings. The Green Cities DLC is definitely one of my favorite DLCs of the game. I simply love the local and organic produce commercial buildings and the self-sustaining residential buildings, which breaks the European theme building rules by enabling you to build high-rise residential structures. I only placed in a few eco-residential buildings which are zoned apart from each other. However, I may be breaking my own rules by zoning residential on avenues. But as long as it's not an overabundance of residential zoning on our main avenue, there shouldn't be much noise pollution. As long as we continue with our design theme of walking paths and tree planting, this city should look fantastic when it's completed. All we need to do is to make sure that the city doesn't collapse along the way. We will make sure that we have economy in check, that there are no devastating death waves or any educational worker complaints from our commercial and industrial buildings. Not to mention that we also have to make sure that traffic runs smoothly and there are no garbage concerns. From 0 to over 100,000 population, we will achieve this just like in Season 1. We have been setting up modes of transportation by trams and monorail, but I actually haven't activated them yet. And yet, our traffic flow is steady at more or less 92% at 23,000 population. However, we did just now activate the ferry routes, but that is only because we needed to test the height of a bridge. From this point to the end of the coastline is just repetitive pathways and tree planting. So I will just convert the fast forward simulation to a before and after scenes, which will save us some time. And we are finally done, though offline I've done some tiny tweaks such as adding some benches and a kiosk to this biodome, and I've also changed some of the green cities high density buildings because they were all square, and I know that there are quarter circle buildings which should mix things up a bit. And I've also added an outside eating area. I think that looks pretty neat. When we zoom out, those high density buildings looks quite subtle. Look how gorgeous that city looks. That is absolutely superb. And let's check out the sides of the coastline. You have, well, this is the perfect scene right here where there's some gaps between the piers and the harbors here. However, on this side we have an extremely long gap, but that is only because this is the end of our tile and we haven't unlocked the other one. I've also added a tiny park here with a unique building because, again, at your stations you want to put something unique such as this so that you have something gorgeous to look at while you're stopping by, or it gives you a reason to actually go there. Similar to this, right, when people come in, and look at that, look at how perfect that is, the height of our pier or our terrain. People are not jumping off and on. The ferries and also the bridges are just right. There's no slamming of the top of the ships onto the bridge. Yeah, that coastline. And also notice how there's also no random flooding. So this is absolutely perfect. What else is there to showcase? That's the offline. I've also added in the fishing routes for our shellfish. So everyone basically knows that you will use whatever is on the map. So for instance, this is shell fishing, so of course you have to use shell fishing harbors, but not a lot of people understand that you also need to understand the length of your route, because if you make it too long, for instance this guy is already at 82% fish loaded, and as much as possible you want the distance here 100%. So by then he is just cruising. Therefore he is just sightseeing, and you want to reduce that. So do not make it too long, and at the same time do not make it too short. Otherwise you are not catching the efficient amount of fish. And what else is there to showcase? And of course, our population's at 23k, and our traffic flow is at 93%. And at the most part, there hasn't been any complaints. See any complaints? Oh, there it is. Got one guy complaining here, and it's gone. So it seldom pops up, and we have at least one guy that abandoned. That isn't terrible by any means. And that is our city. As I mentioned towards the end, I did some offline decorating and did before and after scenes instead of fast forward gameplay to shed off some minutes. Are you guys okay with that, or would you want to see every area that I detail? However, that would mean that the video would be a little longer. Let me know in the comments below. If you haven't already, and you liked the episode and learned something, please consider subscribing. This is Captain Ahvious, and I thank you for watching. Alright, there she goes. Alright, hold up. Alright, so she is Mary, and she is a tourist. Of course she's a tourist. What was I thinking?